Welcome to Flip Lesson 112 for the 6th grade, as we're going to look at algebraic multiplication and division of integers. Now, integers, of course, are kind of a new game, a new aspect, a new way to understand math. But as we look at this lesson, what we're going to see is that because it's math, it's filled with patterns. It's filled with rules that come into play when dealing with different kinds of integers. And what's going to be important in understanding this concept is going back to the fundamentals of how do you multiply, how do you divide, what do those symbols actually mean. Let's take a look at our first problem. All right, it says that you're going to take -4 times 2. As we look at this idea, we can really kind of group it in a number of different ways. All right, we could rewrite this problem as an addition and subtraction problem. Right? We could say, okay, you have two groups of -4. So you have one -4 group plus a second -4 group. All right, you could think about it in that way. Right? You also could think about it in the fact that you have -4 groups of 2, which that just sounds really funny to begin with, right? But that would kind of look like that. It's like, okay, I got a negative +2 plus, sorry, well, I guess you could put a plus there, plus another 2, right? Plus another 2, plus another 2. Right? Now that of course looks very, very funny, very, very strange, but we already looked at the fact that, right, this is going to apply to this, and that's going to make it a -2 plus a -2, right? This is going to make another -2. This is going to make another -2. And so we really have -2 plus -2 plus -2 plus -2, which is really the same thing as -4 plus -4. And in the end, we're going to get the same answer. We're going to get the same answer, right? If these ideas aren't making sense, then we can use a number line to help us see this picture. I'm going to go back to this picture, mostly because it's a little bit faster, right? But I start with this idea, right? If I start with one group of -4, right? Here's my first group going to -4, right? Here's my first -4, right? But it says I have two groups, all right? So if I have a -4 group, and then I have, I'm going to go back another -4, right? Here, my line ends at, oops, I'm off a little bit, right? And then I covered up the number, right? We get our -8 right here for our final answer as we look at this idea, okay? So we have that idea, right? So that looks at the fundamental aspect of what is going on here, right? From here we move on to understanding what is really going on when it comes to multiplying different kinds of numbers. Really, we have different combinations, right? Our first combination was a negative number times a positive number, right? This combination is a negative number times another negative number, right? And really the third combination is the one you've always been doing, right? Is a positive number times a positive number, right? So if we put these ideas together, it can help us understand some patterns that we can see in multiplication and division, right? So I'll move my timeline down, right? If we were to break, right, we understand that, right? Let's go back to our -3 times -4, right? So technically we have -3 groups of -4, right? So I could write that out, right? I have a -4 group plus a -4 group, right? Plus a -4 group, right? Sounds really, really funny. It sounds strange. It looks a little funny, but when you write it out, suddenly we can see what's going on, right? A negative and a negative becomes a positive. Negative becomes a positive. Negative and a negative becomes a positive. And in the end, you get 4 plus 4 plus 4. suddenly we see that you have a positive 12 for an answer. And so as we're working with this, we see kind of some rules of opposites, right? So even though we're going -4, right, we're going -4 in the opposite direction, right? So -4 normally goes this way, but because of this sign, right, we're going to go opposite directions. So we're going 4 and 4, and my timeline doesn't go far enough. Number line, sorry. And so we get to number 12. And so we have that idea. So basically what we're seeing here is we're starting to see a pattern, right? If I have a positive number times a positive number, or if I have a negative number times a negative number, right? If my symbols are the same, I'm going to come away with a positive answer. So if my symbols are the same, I'm going to come away with a positive answer, right? Positive times positive is going to give me positive. Negative times negative is going to give me a positive. And I just showed that to you right here, right? This is why. This is what was going to happen if you have a double negative. Everything's going to turn positive. So that's our first really rule, and I would encourage you to write that down. It will come up later in the notes, all right? Let's go back to this idea. So if you have the same, right, a negative, that's not what I want to be circling, right? If I have a negative times a negative, and that's going to equal a positive, or if I have a positive times a positive, and that's going to equal a positive, then the opposite must be true if you have mixed symbols, right? If I have a negative times a positive, I'm going to get a negative. Just like if I have a positive times a negative, I'm going to get a negative. Right? So we have these patterns. Now these same patterns apply to division. Right? When we look at division, we can see, okay, if I have -10, right? Negative and negative, right? They're going to cancel each other out. They're going to be the same, right? They're going to look a little different, right? But they're going to work in the same way. So really, while this problem does say -10 divided by -3, those negatives are going to cancel each other out. And it's really the same as doing 10 divided by 3. And 10 divided by 3, of course, is 3 1/3. So we come away with that answer. So a -10 divided by a -3 is 3 1/3. Right? I could pull over a timeline and we could look at that, right? If you had, right, -10, right, and you're going to divide it into -3 groups, right? You're also making groups going this way, right? In the end, you're not counting how many negative spots, you're counting how many groups did you just create. In the end, you just created 3 groups, right? Those 3 groups, that's what you just created, right? So we see that idea. All right, so what's going on here? Okay, so if I start with a -20, right? Opposite symbols. Opposite symbol means we're going to come away with a negative answer, right? So 20 divided by, -20 divided by +5 is going to give us, what am I writing here? It's going to give us, right, an answer of 4, right? And it's going to be negative, right? It's going to be negative as we look at this idea. So in the end, we really come away with these principles, right? If the two numbers in a multiplication or division problem have the same sign, the answer is positive. If the two numbers in a multiplication or division problem have different signs, then the answer is going to be negative. And so these are rules that we just want to apply to integers and keep in mind with integers and make sure that we're doing it. And once we learn these rules, then you can get something like this, and I can throw these up at the board and I can say, you don't need to show your work. Do this mentally. Think about the rules and do this mentally, and you'll be successful. This is lesson 112.